Funding for Building New York is provided by First American Title Insurance Company of New York.
Welcome to Building New York. My name is Michael Stoller. A name synonymous with the real estate business in New York is the Rudins. Today I'm fortunate to have Bill Rudin, the president of Rudin Management Company, also the chairman of the Association for Better New York, as my guest. Thank you for being here, Bill.
Michael, thank you for having me.
To tell you a little bit about the late Lou Rudin, Bill's father, and the Rudin family, I'd like to show a brief film clip which is going to be presented in a larger portion at the Tribeca Film Festival, narrated by Sidney Poitier.
They came from modest beginnings. Louis Rudinsky, he spelled his name L-O-U-I-S, came to America from Eastern Europe with very little. Lower Manhattan was his point of entry. Since his arrival occurred before Ellis Island was set up to process immigrants, he came through Castle Clinton, which is now a part of Battery Park. Somewhere along the way, his name got shortened from Rudinsky to Rudin. As a new immigrant, Louis took a variety of jobs and eventually owned a grocery store on Christie Street on the Lower East Side.
In his mind, America was a place where he could do two things. He could practice his religion, and the second thing was to own a piece of real estate.
My grandfather came here in 1883 with 15 cents in his pocket. And my father was able to fulfill a dream that my brother and I are helping fulfill and give on to our kids. There's no reason why these other people that arrived in this country more recently can't have the same dream fulfilled. He was a Russian Jewish kid. They didn't like those people in 1883, but he made it.
He told a story to his children, who told it to us, that one day there was a price war going on, oil price war, and one day John D. Sr., the governor's grandfather, came from his office at 25 Broadway and up the East Side.
One day, John D. Rockefeller, on his way down to Lower Broadway to his office, he was in his horse-drawn carriage, and apparently he used to stop off at different shops. I believe there was a kerosene price war or something like that at the time.
Old man Rockefeller was coming down to the Lower East Side grocery stores. One day he went to my great-grandfather's store, and I guess in the course of their conversation, he said, "Well, where do you live, Mr. Rockefeller?" And Old man Rockefeller said, "I live on 54th Street. So he was, I guess, very impressed with that, and he always wanted to move his family uptown.
His ideal place to live was East 54th Street. When his lawyer called him and said, "Louis, I've got a house for you. You want to move the family up from the Lower East Side? I have a house for you on 54th Street."
And Louis apparently said, "I'll buy it," sight unseen.
But of course, it was on the east side of Park Avenue, which was in those days, the wrong side of the track. But he didn't care.
My grandfather was supposed to have said, "I'll take it." And he said, "Don't you want to look at it?" "No, it's 54th Street. If it's good enough for the Rockefellers, it's good enough for me."
It's now part of 641 Lexington Avenue. Tore down the old buildings there. My family made it into an office building, I think, in the early 60s. So it's our longest investment.
Some people have it for music, some people have it for writing. My grandfather, my father had it for real estate.
Last year, you celebrated your 100th anniversary of being in the real estate business. As we noted in the film, your great-great-great-grandfather, Louis Rudinsky, came over in 1880 or 1883, and he purchased his first property in 1905. And he, your grandfather followed a tradition. He said if it was good enough for the Rockefellers, it was good enough for the Rudins. And the Rudins have done so much over the years. 10 million square feet of office space, 22 apartment houses, civic community, the Marathon, Abney, when the city has been in terrible times. What do you see today happening, being the fourth or fifth generation, depending on how we look at it, of the Rudin involvement with real estate today?
Well, first of all, Michael, we're doing exactly what my grandfather and actually his father and my father and uncle, and now I call it the third generation, but it's really the fourth generation, continuing to manage our buildings, grow our business, and do the right thing for our customers, our tenants, and for New York City. And as that film that you just saw talked about, why my great-grandfather bought that location and why his son, Sam, held on to it and built it up. We believe in New York City, and we've been fortunate. I've been fortunate. My family has been fortunate that the generations before us did this tremendous amount of hard work. My great-grandfather came into New York at Battery Park, right on the picture you have here, in 1883 with nothing. And he had a vision, he had a dream, and he couldn't fulfill that dream in Russia. He came to here with nothing in his pockets, and then when he died, he had built up enough money to be able to buy his first property. So we're just carrying on that tradition, that dream, and hopefully we'll pass it on to the next generation.
Let's talk about certain of the, over the last 25 or 15 to 20 years of developments done by the Rudin organization. When you and I met the other day, we were talking about 1675 Broadway. That was a time before Times Square was developed. How did the Rudins get involved to develop a property on the corner of Broadway and 52nd, 53rd Street?
Well, this was in the mid-'80s, and the market was very strong at that time. We had just acquired a property on 52nd between Park and Madison, and in the middle of developing it, we got downzoned, and we lost some FAR, buildable square footage. At the same time, the west side, because there were a lot of pressures to create more opportunities for development on the west side. They wanted to downzone the east side, and the city and the City Planning Commission upzoned the west side. And so we started looking for properties. We thought that the market would continue to be strong for commercial development, and we found this site that was owned by the Schubert organization, the theater owners, the largest theater owners in the city, and we were able to negotiate a long-term lease with them and design a very unique building that literally cantilevers over the Broadway theater. We recladded the Broadway theater. And we knew 52nd Street. We felt very comfortable with 52nd Street. It was not in the heart of Times Square, which was still 20 years ago, still not developed as it is today. And it was also literally right in between where the Coliseum site, which was going to be developed then, and the Times Square redevelopment. So we thought this was a great location, there was great transportation, and we thought there was demand for space. So we went about and made a deal with an advertising agency for the base of the building, and were able to get the project going and get done before the market turned down in the late 80s.
And let's talk a little bit about the market turning down, because the Rudins made your first building in Lower Manhattan was 80 Pine Street, acquired in the late 50s, early 60s.
From Chase Manhattan Bank.
And then you acquired, in 1980, the building that I think is very instrumental and very creative, when you acquired 55 Broad.
Well, we actually didn't acquire. My grandfather and father and uncle had built it in the early 60s as the headquarters for Goldman Sachs. So we had always owned that site.
And so, as many people realize, in the late 80s, early 90s, It was Drexel, I believe, who was your tenant.
Drexel was
at
then
that
the
time.
tenant.
Was your tenant, had certain financial difficulties and changes, and that building from 1990 to 1995 lay dormant.
It was a very difficult decision for us, and I remember walking into my dad's office, and when I got the phone call that Drexel was going bankrupt, and I told them that, and it was about a year or so later when the whole building was completely empty, so it was like 1991, and we marketed the building. We tried to figure out a way to attract tenants, but the building was full of asbestos. The downtown market had totally collapsed, and you could literally not give the space away. And so we had I think, luckily following the philosophy of my grandfather, we had a very low leverage building. We had a very small mortgage. I think it was maybe $10 million at that time. And so we were able to carry the property. I think anybody else owning that building and looking down the future would have probably given the building back to the banks, because literally every other building in the neighborhood across the street, around the corner, was foreclosed on. So we're long-term players, we're long-term believers in this city, so we knew somewhere along the line the city would come back. And we worked proactively, as my father taught us to, in terms of working with the city and the state to try to come up with a redevelopment plan for Lower Manhattan. And Mayor Giuliani, who took over as mayor in 1995, one of the first things that he did was focus on Lower Manhattan, and it changed his plan, created incentives, turned office buildings into residential properties, changed the zoning to allow that, and where properties were selling for $10 a foot, a couple of years later they were going for $50 or $100 a foot. So the whole world changed with the perception and reality of downtown and the investment we made in turning 55 Broad into a technology building.
I think when you and I met, we were talking that you had seen the notice in the newspaper that Prodigy was going to move downtown, and your father, who really didn't know much about the computer industry, as many people in their 50s, 60s, and your dad was probably at that time late 60s, early 70s,
Late
said,
60s.
You know, Bill, what do you think if Prodigy is moving downtown? Is it something that we should get involved with?
Well, you have to remember in 1995 or 6, if you talked about bandwidth and the internet, very few people knew what we were talking about. And luckily I had an associate of mine, John Gilbert, who understood what technology was going to be in the future and understood that to create a infrastructure within the building that would allow tenants easy access to the internet, and we designed that product. At the same time, the city, with the downtown plan and the Downtown Alliance, which was the business improvement district, and the Partnership of New York, were trying to find
which you and your family were instrumental
involved
members.
in all those organizations. So we were all working together to try to come up with ways to create economic vitality and create new jobs for the city. And the internet in 1995 and 1996 was the next, next new thing, as the people would say at that time. And we designed the building to allow easy access for companies to get onto the internet. But that story of how we got to design that building and do it was, as you said, there was an article in the New York Times, and Prodigy announced they were moving from Westchester to Lower Manhattan. They never ended up in our building, but that was, for my dad, the symbol and the signal for him and for us to take a huge risk. We invested our own money, our own capital in the building, because most internet companies had very little net worth, and we took a huge, huge risk and put capital in, renovated the building for $40 million, created the environment for these companies to grow, and we literally within 18 months were 100% leased.
Now, let's go forward a couple years. You go back to Times Square. We're now in the late 90s. Prudential owned all this property in the middle of Times Square. Took them a little longer. Development takes a little longer. And Doug Durst completes his building. And you and Reuters joint venture, am I correct?
Well, Reuters came to us. We had a relationship with Reuters. They were our tenant in a building on 52nd Street between Park and Madison, the building I talked about before. Plus, they also, I think, really appreciated what we had done down at 55 Broad Street and understood the the melding of real estate and technology. And they were looking to consolidate all their offices in New York City. And they, the president of the company at that time, Mike Sanderson, had the foresight to realize that this site in Times Square had tremendous potential in terms of branding for Reuters. They were not well known in the United States, and that they could create a tremendous sign. If you go there today, it's a 20,000-foot LED sign, which is just magnificent. And they were able to get tax incentives because that was available in Times Square. And they asked us to help them develop this building and negotiate with Prudential. And the irony of it was my dad, 10, 15, 20 years before, had, as his capacity as the head of Abney, had really worked very hard to try to get Times Square cleaned up and change the zoning and change the whole environment. We never bid on any of those buildings originally, but when Reuters came to us and asked us to help them, we thought it was a great opportunity, and we have a very successful and dynamic building there.
Did you ever think that Times Square, some people said to me that Times Square changed when Disney moved to Times Square?
Well, I think it changed for a positive. That really was, sort of the bell cow that changed the people's perception and the reality of what 42nd Street was about. And they had tremendous foresight. I walked through the New Amsterdam Theater before they renovated, and you just couldn't believe the devastation. But you could see the beauty underneath the dirt and the grime. And Michael Eisner had tremendous foresight in taking a huge risk and making a substantial investment and really setting the stage for the development of Times Square.
Let's go a little bit downtown. As you said, Rudy Giuliani, your dad, the Alliance, Abney, everybody, Governor Pataki. These people really took the bull by the horns, as one would say. And they really, they created the 421 Gs for residential. Now, the family still owns 5 or 6 buildings downtown. And one building, I think you own 110
Wall Street.
And recently 100 Wall was sold, and it's going to be converted. There's been at least 5 million square feet of obsolete office buildings in lower Manhattan. Have you ever thought of converting any of your buildings downtown to residential?
Well, we in our daily process of looking at our portfolios, we looked at some of the buildings downtown, but for a variety of reasons, lease turnover and floor configurations, we didn't think that it was the right thing for us to do. And we've turned out to be right, because on Wall Street, there aren't too many office buildings left on Wall Street. So 110 Wall is perfectly positioned in the future for companies that want that Wall Street address. And 55 Broad Street, with the technology that we have, we still think that what we're doing is the right way to go. That doesn't mean that other properties.
No, it's very interesting. When I go down to Wall Street, half of the properties, many of them not in the Class A building like you, are converted. You walk down Wall Street today, you have BMW there, and
right.
You have residential.
I think it's great. What the master plan for the redevelopment of Lower Manhattan was all about, and I think you're seeing, Hermes coming down. You've got BMW. You've got Bobby Vans just open up around the corner from our building at 55 Broad Street. It's incredible what's happening, the conversions and the prices that people are paying. That helps us, because you need that mix, that balance between residential and commercial, just like in Midtown. And the energy that's created by people who are living there, and the retailers then come downtown, which helps the office workers. So this all plays in a positive way. And we think that our buildings were built as office buildings, and we have a tremendous amount of capital laid into them. So we'll continue doing that, but who knows what happens in the future. But we're very bullish on the commercial market downtown. The incentives that were passed in the summer, Shelley Silver and the mayor and the governor and Joe Bruno worked very hard to get those done, and they're paying off dividends now. We had a building at 32 6th Avenue, a building, one of the only building that we've bought, an office building that we've renovated into a high-tech office building. And we had 2 floors vacant, 3 floors, sorry, vacant for over 2 years. And in the last 6 months, we've rented to Cambridge University Press from Midtown. We've rented to a British advertising agency, Bartle, Bogle and Hegarty. We rented to RAI, which is the Italian TV national network. And so most of these companies were from Midtown moving downtown. That's a trend that we continue to see happening, that people realize that the prices in Midtown are getting very exorbitant, and that if they want to stay in New York City and Manhattan, the alternative for them is to come downtown, where there's relatively affordable space, there are tax incentives, there's transportation, you've got 15 subway lines coming to Lower Manhattan, and you now having the mixture of residential and commercial and retail happening. So these are all really positive things for Lower Manhattan.
What about the problem that many owners, builders have today with the cost of land to build something new?
It's we look at things every day and run numbers and analyze deals. It's very, very tough. I mean, there's so much capital in the marketplace. And we're sort of penalized for our own success to some degree, because everybody wants to invest in New York City. There is so much flow of capital and people from literally all over the world wanting to buy a piece of the rock here in New York City. And now you're seeing it spread into the other boroughs. And this is great. And the mayor and the chairman of the City Planning Commission, Amanda Burden, have done an incredible job in terms of changing the zoning and doing a progressive planning for neighborhoods, whether it's Long Island City or in Brooklyn or the Bronx or the West Side and Chelsea, the High Line area. These areas are going to be incredible in the next couple of years as you see conversions and new construction going on. It's very, very positive, but it makes it tough for us to find the right product.
Relevant to that point, New York City, what your great-grandfather and everyone, you wanted to want to live and you want to work here. But when there's a problem that there's a limited number of affordable housing, how do we, and I know in your role as chairman of Abney and the others, how do we take care of this problem of finding affordable housing for the working stock?
Well, I think the mayor has come out with one program, and he's working on another program to create more affordable housing and put a combination of city money in and federal money and private money. And but I think as the Manhattan becomes more expensive and the numbers start creeping up in other boroughs, you will see more capital flows into those areas, and whether it's the South Bronx or Brooklyn or Queens, you'll start seeing more larger developments that will have components of, whether it's 80-20 or, because their land costs are cheaper, affordability. So I think as the city continues to expand in other boroughs and other neighborhoods, you will still will be creating that housing. You'll never create enough. I mean, that's always a problem. But this city is a rental city. That's always been a rental city. And you're correct that in Manhattan today, you only can build a condo. There's no way to afford to do rental. In the boroughs, I think you can still afford to do that, but you'll see, as I said before, in the next few years, a tremendous amount of residential development going on throughout the whole city.
In 1997, there was an article written in the New York Times talking about the families, the Roses, the Rudins, the Dursts, and it really, the pitch of the article was that Bernie Mendick, let him rest in peace, sold his buildings to Vornado Realty Trust. And this columnist, not like myself, who didn't really understand New York City real estate, basically said that within 5-10 years, the families would no longer own real estate.
Well, it's obviously hasn't happened yet, and I think the families have become even stronger. I think the next generation, I'm very friendly with the next generations of the Durst or the Wilpons or Jerry Spire's son Rob or
No, I agree with you. Because I reread that article today because and a very bright guy involved with the REIT said that because the REIT had acquired them, that all of these families were going to sell, and in reality, none of them sold.
Well, I think it's because
some of the properties were sold.
Well, but I think it's also the fact that there is a next generation, that there are, I think Bernie's son was a lot younger. He had older children who were not in the business, so maybe his dynamics were different. But there is definitely economic pressure. The REITs have a tremendous buying power. Steve Green converted his business to a REIT. And we're happy with what we do. I mean, we don't have to produce a quarterly, report to satisfy the stockholders. If we want to do a project, we'll do it. If we don't want to do it, we don't do it. And that, that makes for our life, style, we're happy with that. There are other people who want to keep growing their business to a certain level and do different things. So, and there is enough opportunities if you structure a deal right for us to keep growing our business. It's tougher and tougher every day as more capital comes in. And my father and uncle were pretty adamant in their philosophy that we would not go public. And my generation, my cousin, my sister, my cousins, we're happy with what we have. And when we find opportunities to make a deal where people realize that we add value to a certain project, that's when we'll be able to make another investment.
As I believe it was an article, maybe it was your grandfather Sam said, "We're never going to sell," and you haven't sold, and you really, your cousins, your uncle, your late father are truly builders of New York, and I'm really happy to have you today on my show.
Well, it was my pleasure, and looking forward to coming back again.
Thank you.
Funding for Building New York was provided by First American Title Insurance Company of New York.